Very good, and then just tell me next slide.
Okay, and it's gonna change on here too? Okay, so, I'm Delilah Brigham. I am, the planning, and GIS staff officer for the Tongass. My background, I started with the Forest Service as a fisheries biologist. And then I moved into NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, as an interdisciplinary team leader. And I did that for over 15 years. And then I moved into leadership as a deputy district ranger. And then now I'm as a staff officer, with planning as one of my staff area that I oversee. So we are going to be officially starting our plan revision today. Our notice of intent is actually going to be published into the Federal Register to start our plan revision. So today I'm going to be talking about some topics, giving a brief overview of forest plan revision, the two main pieces of the revised plan that are directly management and outputs, the timber suitability and timber metrics and other plan content. And then I'll be ending on how you can actually be engaged during this revision process. So I'll start off with, 3 slides down. So I'll start with the important question. It's not doing it either.
So the problem is that it's working on Zoom.
It's working on Zoom, but not here.
So we just need to, I need to switch the, oh my goodness.
Technology.
I know, right?
The marbles.
How am I gonna get that too? Can I give you my computer so you can see your notes? And then we can run, you know, the presentations that we can sit on here.
Why don't I just open my computer
Yep.
and I'll do my notes off of my computer.
Okay.
You don't have to move everything around.
Erin, will you stop share? So I can get it to the speaker.
So, well, mine is coming.
You need your thumb drive back? No.
Well, yeah, eventually, but yeah.
I know.
I have a hard copy here too. Okay,
So now this should advance this.
okay. Okay, so I'll start off with a simple but important question. What is the current Tongass land management plan and when was it actually revised?
I'm just kidding.
So it was actually revised over 25 years ago in 1997. We've actually had 2 amendments, one in 2008 and one in 2016. But the base of the foundation of those plans is actually from the 1997 plan. Okay, so what is a land management plan? It's a document that provides overall management, direction, and guidance for the Tongass. The direction establishes sideboards that guide our future management and activities across the Tongass on the ground. Many of us are more familiar with, with site-specific, forest plan occur usually on a single ranger district or a particular watershed. In contrast, forest plans do not provide that site-specific direction. It's such as where to put a recreational trail, where to do wildlife habitat improvement, where to put that timber harvest. It actually guides management at a forest-wide scale, providing direction of uses, multiple uses across the national forest. So I want to think, I use a lot of analogies. So think of your commercial or your community zoning. Your community has designated areas for residential and commercial use only, or in some situations, industrial areas. A forest plan does the same thing. It actually outlines in it where areas can be focused for management, where we can focus recreation development, where we can focus timber harvest. It gives that sideboard for where we can actually put activities on the ground. A forest plan also designates areas where more protection or constraints for that management can actually occur. So like a zoning ordinance, it focuses on the what. It should not be prescriptive. It also should not repeat existing law, regulation, or policy. Those things we already have to adhere to, so it should not actually be reiterated in a forest plan. It provides the guidance and constraints on management to meet desired conditions. Okay, so what's in a forest plan? So like I said, I like analogies. So think of a forest plan like a boardwalk with railings. Boardwalk, we're taking that boardwalk and we're going from point A to point B. It's where we want to go, where we're going to get to, where we want to get to. Forest plan does the same thing with desired conditions. It's our vision of the Tongass into the future. We're at this stage and this is where we want to go. So that point A to point B. Okay. Desired conditions have to be detailed enough to measure that progress towards the achievement of those desired conditions through management activities. And all management activities should be aimed at meeting those desired conditions. However, those desired conditions don't have to be over the whole plan area. It could be focused only on certain parts of the plan area. So we can have a desired condition for the whole plan area. We might have additional desired conditions for very specific areas. Okay, next is objectives. So objectives is when we want to get there, the strategy. An objection or objective is concise, measurable, time-specific statement. And don't laugh at me, my planning is getting to me. And the desired rate of progress towards that desired condition. So they outline the tools in which we're going to reach or how we're going to reach those desired conditions and give us mileposts along the way to show that we're actually making progress towards achieving those desired conditions. For an example, we could state per decade, we will complete 600 miles of stream and wetland restoration projects to maintain those aquatic and riparian habitats, to maintain and support plant and animal species found in these riparian areas. That would be an objective. The desired condition was to maintain plant and riparian areas. So it gives per decade the time frame. It gives us how 600 miles of stream and wetland restoration projects. So it's giving us a measurable way to actually achieve those desired conditions. Okay, so the railings on that boardwalk are standard and guidelines that keep us in the direction towards our desired conditions. We can move a little to the left and a little to the right, but we have to stay within those sideboards of those railings that the forest plan outlines. The framework that guides the future decision, but not actually authorize any project or action. The sideboards is for how we design and implement future projects and activities. So standards are the rules that we operate in with when we develop projects. Okay, these are mandatory constraints that we actually have to put on projects and activities that are implemented within the Forest Service land. So an example would be vehicles will be parked in locations to avoid spilled fuel getting into streams. There's no deviation of that. It's a standard. We have to make sure that we're parking our vehicles in which spilled fuel cannot get into a stream course. Guidelines are like standards, but we can deviate as long as we're meeting the intent of that guideline. Okay, so they're still mandatory, but we can move a little to that light right and left. So to maintain the structure of stream habitat, large woody debris should not be cut or removed from a riparian area unless it's going to cause harm to structures or human safety. So it gives the outline of when we can actually still remove that tree. Overall, we shouldn't. But if we're in a situation that is going to cause harm to human safety or to a structure, we can then remove that tree. So a guideline kind of gives us that deviation. It allows us to deviate from what, in order to meet the intent of that guideline. So one of the questions that we always get is, well, how is this tied to budget and financial, the funds that we get through the Forest Service? Finances isn't tied to the forest plan revision. Only what actually is going to go into plan components. Finances come in when we're going to be implementing. What do we actually have the funds to actually implement at any given time? Okay,
Quick question on SAF.
sure.
Probably used to know this answer, but so you already said that it can't duplicate a current law, like a CFR, is that?
Mhm, correct.
So it's not a CFR, but it's, what would you call it? It's just a standard in the plan, so it's a plan element,
So it's a plan component. Yeah, that's how we term it. Plan
but it
component.
has almost the same standing as a CFR.
Yes, we have to adhere to it at that point when it's in the forest plan. Yep.
So Delana, I thought that we couldn't have guidelines under 2012.
We have to be,
Good question.
oh, both of them or just the one, the last one? So I'll do both. The first one was about whether or not a plan component is like CFR or a law. And I stated that yes, we have to adhere to it if it's in the forest plan. The second question was that according to the 2012 planning rule, we didn't need to do actually guidelines. That is actually not really true. So when you're going to be putting guidelines into the forest plan, you have to specify whether it's a standard or a guideline. You have to identify which one it actually is under the 2012 planning rule. They're not, the guidelines are still required. You just can't say, you can't be generic about it of whether it falls under a standard or a guideline. You actually have to specifically state which one it is. Okay, so the last is we need to identify lands as suitable or not suitable for various types of multiple uses and activities based on those desired conditions. The only one that's required by the 2012 planning rule is timber suitability. However, that is not the only land suitability that we determine. We also look at what areas are more suitable to focus on a specific resource. Like I talked about recreation, we might want to focus an area on developing rec versus looking at timber harvest or wildlife improvement. So we have the ability to actually focus an area on a specific resource. That does not preclude us from meeting our objective of multiple use across the forest. Okay. And if I'm going too fast or I say something, please stop me, ask for clarifying questions. I don't mind. So why revise? Okay, so since 1997, there's been a lot of changes that have happened. We have new scientific information out there. new methodology has evolved. It also, under the 2012 planning rule, we have to acknowledge and incorporate indigenous science into our forest plan. There's been many social, cultural, or resource changes. So there's a need to actually integrate those changes in our forest plan. On the ground, ecological changes have happened. And this is where new science is actually going to be helping us for management into the future. How our communities and visitors are using the forest and the associated demands from the forest have changed. What do people want when they visit our national forest? What kind of products do they want to actually take off of the national forest? These things have changed since 1997. And there's also potentially new threats that we should be looking at and managing for that weren't a concern over 25 years ago. Like I said, a few of these were addressed during our amendments, but many others have not actually been formalized, recognized, or incorporated in our forest plan. So our new planning regulations that we should be revising or updating our forest plan as conditions change or every 15 years. So we're way past when we should be revising our forest plan. Okay, so key concepts. So there are key concepts under the 2012 planning rule that is establishing the overall planning framework and procedures when we're preparing a revision. So it also emphasizes the use of best available science, assessments of trends and current conditions. It also requests that we have a robust public participation every step of the way on a forest plan revision process. We should be looking at current community plans, tribal plans, local land use, developing of a new monitoring program with the changing conditions that we actually have. So in the 2012 planning rule, there are also several requirements for the plans themselves. We have to be looking at ecological, social, and economic sustainability across the plan area. We should also be looking at our plant and animal communities and making sure that they have the capacity to persist over the planning area. We must provide for ecosystem services and multiple uses, which includes outdoor recreation, timber, wildlife, fish, but also the protection of cultural and historic resources, and then management of areas of tribal importance. These are new things that have come out in the 2012 planning rule. And the plan must also include the regular components, standard and guidelines, but also plan content requiring timber management. So these last four on the slide aren't procedural, but they have real effects on the ground, and we should be managing for them. Forest plan is a high-level document, as I said, forest-wide scale, but it directs the directions or the decisions of the Forest Service that makes on all these components. We also have several parallel processes that are required by law to inventory and make recommendations on wild and scenic rivers, wilderness, species of conservation concern. And we have recorded webinars on these particular processes that we have been doing over the last 2 months. And we have a web page that you can go and look at these recorded webinars on these processes. So what does this mean? So during the revision process, we start by assessing where we're at. So all of those change of conditions that I've been talking about, we now have to assess where they are at. What changes do we actually see? What uses have changed? What trends are out there? How the communities are actually utilizing their forest. And we are also engaging with local tribes, native corporations, partners, stakeholders, and the public to see how they want to be engaged during this revision process. And we've been doing that for the last year. So like I said, today was published in our Federal Register our notice of intent to start our plan revision process. And the first stage is the assessment. So we're taking all of that data that we've been collecting, and now we're wrapping it into the assessment. So that's where we're then evaluating all of those existing data that we've been collecting, looking at the economic and social, ecological conditions. We're taking all of that benchmark data, putting them into GIS layers or identifying what GIS layers we already have. And then we're doing analysis on all of that data and putting it into a document to say where we're at today and where do we want to actually go. And that will then provide our need for change. So the next one is plan development in 2025. We should have our draft assessment out for public review in January of 2025 is our target date. As soon as we finalize that assessment, we'll then be moving into plan components, our plan development. And that would then be our proposed action. Then that would lead us into our and finally into a signed record of decision. And we're targeting 2028 for that. So where does timber processes come into the plan revision? Okay, so timber management. So timber requirements.
10 minutes.
Oh, okay, I ran through it myself, but I always go a lot faster when I'm doing it myself. So let's begin with a broad overview of what's required for timber in forest plan under the 2012 planning rule. First is identifying lands that are suitable and not suitable for timber production. The next three tells us what to include in plan components. We need to spell out when and how we conduct timber harvest, both on lands suitable for timber production and those lands that are unsuitable for timber production, as well as the limitations on timber harvest. Limitations on harvest can include, but are not limited to, considerations that are found in the National Forest Management Act of 1976, what we term NIFMA, and I tend to use a lot of acronyms. So we're going to be getting into more of these bullets in the future slides. The last bullet displays our likely vegetation management practices, such as types and acres of harvest and timber volume outputs over time. Okay. So step one. There are two primary steps. The first step is identifying lands that may be suitable for timber. We look at the technical criteria from NIFMA to define the maximum possible area that may be suitable for timber production. This piece is sort of black and white. We have to meet that technical criteria in order to make the determination if it meets suitable or not. There's very little that we can go outside of that technical criteria. What useful input that we would need is to ensuring that we have used and interpreted the available data to represent those criteria correctly. The second step is when we define the lands that are suitable for timber production based on all of that criteria. Then what are the desired conditions and management objectives for that land? We need to look at, to make this determination, we need to incorporate more qualitative factors and discussion on how we want to manage that land under this revised plan. So to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about, so the light blue is the all lands. So we start with the National Forest System lands on the forest, and we subtract lands then that does not meet or that meets the criteria that would reduce the land base that is suitable for timber production. And so if you look on the far left of the screen, some of those are things that we then remove land that is not suitable is lands that have been withdrawn at a higher level of decision-making. Congressional actions, presidential executive orders, withdrawals by the chief of the Forest Service or Secretary of Agriculture. This includes wilderness areas, inventory roadless areas, our land use designation, LUD 2 areas. The designations or through laws, regulations apply to these lands preclude the opportunity to manage them for timber production. We don't actually have the authority to propose or make changes in these areas during the plan revision process. The third criteria lists lands that we remove where it's not currently we don't have current technology to conduct timber harvest without causing irreversible damage to soil, slope, and other watershed conditions. Some easy examples of lands that are removed during this step may be high vulnerability karst or steep slopes. Next, we remove lands where we cannot provide reasonable assurance that we can restock those lands within 5 years of conducting a regeneration harvest. We use information like potential veg types to eliminate sites that can be too, up here it's too wet, but down south where I pulled some of this information is too hot or too dry. But we have to ensure that there's reforestation at 5 years. Lastly, we remove lands that are not considered forest lands. So the definition of this is land that is or is capable of being 10% occupied by trees. So if they don't have at least 10% occupied by trees, it's not considered forested land. Policy states that we can use canopy cover or tree density as a metric for this determination. We have used vegetation mapping to eliminate lands that cannot support that level of tree cover, such as grasslands, shrublands, open musk. Also remove water bodies, rivers, areas permanently developed in a non-forest condition, such as roads and utility corridors. So if there's an area devoid of trees, that is removed.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
On the suited, once you have the suited land base, I'm trying to remember myself, so the standards and guides often remove additional timber depending on the standard and guide, but that's just at the project level, not at the suitable or unsuitable level.
Correct. At the
That's the
suitable,
important point. It keeps getting smaller potentially is.
yep, and I'll go into that.
Yeah, oh, good.
Yep. So once we establish lands that may be suitable, so the yellow, the tan may be suitable, that is a constant that's held throughout the entire process. Okay? It's the subset of lands that we have now eliminated from all of those other criteria that I've just gone through. And that is the max area in which we can say that we have suitable land for timber production. The bright blue in the center is the lands to be suitable in the proposed action or the planned draft plan or an alternative that that will then move forward on potential production, timber production. So based on those standard and guidelines that you're talking about. So there's also that black dash line. So this is a theoretical example of lands where harvest can occur. So we talked about those qualifying criteria. So harvest can, sorry, I just.
Noel, I hate to rush to, but we got about 5 minutes before we're gonna cut into lunch, so we're kind of on a.
Okay, I only have a couple more slides on timber. We don't get to the other forest plan stuff. Go and look at our Tongass Forest Plan Revision webpage. There's a lot of information in there that tells you how to get engaged. But I really want to go through the timber stuff for you guys. Is that okay? I think I can get through it in 5 minutes.
It's super good.
Okay,
I thought a couple people short on their line.
so harvest can be permitted on lands outside of those that are deemed suitable for timber production. And also outside of lands that may be suitable. An example of this is where lands could be suitable for timber production, but it also is, with, a landmark like, roadless, where minor amounts of that harvest could be permissible for restoration, purposes. So even though it's in roadless, we don't normally say that it's suitable. But if we have an operator out there already that's already adjacent to that land and we need some restoration work, we can actually, you pull some of that tree material out for restoration purposes. So there's those kind of instances in which there is other lands may occur, but it's very, very specific in which we can do that in. Okay, so previously suitability determinations. Under the 2016 Forest Plan Amendment effort, in Appendix A, we updated the plan to comply with the 2012 planning rule, and we did look at timber suitability during that. It is going to be necessary to relook at that suitability in the current plan effort reasons, which I've listed here. So mostly because of those environmental changes, those social and economic changes, land acquisitions, the land exchanges. So we need to include better data, and, of what is now suitable and what isn't. And then, timber metrics. This is the other big one. So timber suitability, kind of gone through that. The next two items on this list, is related to plan components. We talk about the use of timber harvest on both land suitable and not suitable. So I'm not going to go into much detail on these. These are more in which we get into plan components. And where and what purposes harvest could be done on lands not suitable for timber production. So we can get into that, during plan component. The last one, or the next to last one, is limitations on harvest. It's usually through the standard and guidelines we talked about. But another one is max opening sizes, requiring timely reforestation to occur. So what we term as green up. So those are all kinds of things that might provide a limitation on harvest and where it can occur. And then on the last bullet, the revised plan will disclose our expected harvest types and levels over time. Some potential management approaches as well. As this part of the requirement, we also have we have to have a few specific metrics that must be included. So our land management plan needs to have that information in it. And then the required timber metrics. So these are the ones that I really wanted to focus on. So the metric of sustained yield limit. It's equivalent to the long-term sustained yield limit that was included in the 2008 plan. Both are meant to provide the upper ceiling of the level of timber harvest that may be conducted while meeting the requirements of the 2012 planning rule, for long-term sustainability. It's very specifically defined. It's calculated as all lands that may be suitable for timber production and is a constant across all alternatives. This number is not limited by financial constraints, like I've said before, or any resource constraints. That's the larger one. This number is not a target or an objective, though. It's just a determination of what may be suitable. In short, the sustained yield limit reflects how much timber we could theoretically harvest if our only consideration was ensuring that sustainability over time. And then the potential timber sale quantity and potential wood sale quantity. The layer of these is more closely similar to the concept of the allowable sale quantity from the 1982 planning rule. So the PTSQ includes only timber volume that meets utilization standards. In other words, it's a log on a log truck. It estimates, includes potential harvest from all lands, not just land suitable for timber production, unlike the sustained yield limit. The PWSQ is essentially the PTSQ plus other sources of woody materials such as firewood, biomass, other things that outside of the utility. And I might be screwing up these terms because I'm not a timber person, so please stop me if I am.
Probably wrap up till I.
Yep. So we are required to display these estimates based on the capability of the unit. So we hear a lot of interest of what the forest could do if money and capacity were not limiting factors. And that's why we have to actually display this because it kind of gives the max. And then we also have a timber scheduling model that we have to include, and that's an extensive inventory of tree and vegetation plot data across the forest. So there's a lot of things that kind of go into our timber management. So any kind of input, public engagement that you guys can help us with would be very appreciative to make sure that we're actually looking at these things correctly, especially me. I'm not a timber person, but thank you.
Thank you so much. Is it okay if we give out this presentation in this, in the,
So unfortunately, it's lunch, so we
so that then they can look through it?
went into lunch a little bit. There may be questions, but I hate to cut into everyone's lunch hour, because we've got, well, we want to be back at 1 to be on each schedule, so,
And we'll put this presentation in the meeting room chat and then also send it out. So if you want to look through the whole presentation, and then ask questions.
thank you, Delilah.
Sorry. This was presented as a webinar as well, so I don't know if you have.
Oh,
a
good.
link to the webinar.
It's on the revision webpage.
Good. Okay, I'll put that up there too.
Back at 1?
So back at 1, yes, please.
Thank you.
Where folks go, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be here.